Esplin, and this is the third video in a three-part series learning how to edit with Adobe Camera Raw. In the first one we talked about VSO, View, Sort, and Organize. In the second video was all about how to do the different quick slider editing options in ACR. And in this video I'll show you how to bring an edited photo from ACR, Adobe Camera Raw, right into Photoshop and be able to go back and forth using a smart object. So that's a really handy way to just bring your workflow right into Photoshop. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at our images here, and in this time I've chosen a RAW file. It was taken on a Canon camera, an older Canon camera a while ago, and this CR2 file is still here in my folder. I wanted to be able to see some RAW images for all different types of cameras. So if it's a RAW image and not a JPEG, I just have to double click it and it's going to open it right up. If you're trying to edit a JPEG, maybe like this one, you would have to do Command R to open it. But we'll just go ahead and double click this RAW image. And again, the difference between RAW and JPEG in your camera is just a much bigger file. Your RAW images are a lot larger and they haven't had any compression or edits, and so it's very nice to be able to do some edits. It won't look near as grainy, or it won't be as destructive when you're editing. On a JPEG, even though we can edit non-destructively, it's not going to hold up as well as this nice, huge, uncompressed RAW file. But they do take a lot of space. So here we are in Adobe Camera Raw. I'm just going to go over and play with kind of the temperature there. I'm going to reduce the exposure, especially my highlights and my shadows. You can get some more tips on how to do some edits if you view the second video. But I'll just quickly do some quick edits here. Raise my shadows and my blacks. We'll bring up the detail in the shadows. And some clarity and a little bit of sats there. Bring out those colors. Now vibrance is going to bring out the blues, but I think I'll go over here, grab the gradient tool on the top up there, and I'm going to drag this down, and then I'll show you what's kind of cool. Right now it's set at a higher exposure, but we're going to kind of bring these back into their normal positions, and I'm just going to lower that exposure and that gradient. You can see that I can, really darken my sky up. Now, if it's kind of got a blown out sky like this one did, that's a really handy way to just bring those highlights down by using that gradient tool, because then it kind of does it in a nice gradual fashion. I could do another gradient if I hit New, and I could bring one up from the bottom and do the opposite. Instead of making it darker, I could lighten it a little. In this case, I kind of like the shadows there. I just wanted to show you what you can do. You can just bring those shadows right up if you wanted to see more detail there. So I think we'll just kind of leave it where it was. If I want to just delete that one, I select it, make sure it's selected, and hit delete. So you kind of get the idea, and again, you go back and do some more editing with that second video. But once I've done some edits here, if I just hit Open Image at the bottom, it's going to open it right from ACR into Photoshop. They're hooked together, and it's kind of brings you to ACR, which is the intermediate step, and then you go right into Photoshop with it. So now I've brought into Photoshop, and I can finish some edits. I may want to first do a Command J or Control J on a PC, which copies the layer. That's a really good idea because I don't want to do destructive edits on my original layer. So now I can come in, I could do an adjustment layer, I could do, I'll probably do an adjustment layer and do color balance. I'd like to be able to check those sliders and move those around to see if I can improve the color balance at all by looking at some of those. And this one's looking like it's pretty well balanced. I kind of like the way it is. So there's a lot of different ways you can do some edits here in Photoshop. One I might want to do on this top layer is go ahead and get I'll go ahead and make a selection here of these little extra branches that might be a little distracting, and there's lots of different ways you could do this. I think what I'll do is what I'm going to do is go ahead and use this spot removal tool, and I'm going to use my right bracket key to make it larger, and it'll use content aware just to kind of take some of these out. It'll automatically mix it with pixels in the area. It's a really quick way to just go ahead and take something small like telephone wires or any little branches like this. It'll just automatically, without having to use a clone stamp, it will just try to guess what would be a good thing to replace it with by what the surrounding pixels are. And it does a pretty good job for something like that. So I could go in and make a few edits if I had any spots in the sky or any little things that I wanted to clean up. That's where I would do that. So again, once I've done my edits, I'd probably want to do a little sharpening here. I'd go to filter and go down to sharpen, probably do some smart sharpen, but I wouldn't do it on the sky. I would just do it independently, probably just the amount up about 2/3 or 3/4 and the radius about 1/3. Hit OK. And it's probably a good idea to copy your layer again when you're going to do that. And once you've sharpened it, I'm probably just going to mask out the sky or any areas that I don't want to have any sharpening on. So one good way to do that, since I could just put a black mask on it by just doing an option when I click the mask, and it will put black in that area. So then I would just bring the sharpening back where I want it. So on this layer right here, I'm going to hold option click to put a black mask. That just hid all the sharpening I did on the layer. So now I hit B for my brush tool, and I go over here to my colors, and I'm going to add white, which is going to bring the sharpening back in that area. So up here I have opacity of 50%. I'm going to hit 0 to make it, and a shift 0 to bring those back to 100%. So wherever I come and do this, it's going to bring the sharpening effect back in. So we're going to do a Command plus to zoom in on this, and I'm going to do undo so you can see that. That's kind of with it hidden, so you can see I'm bringing the sharpness back in. It's almost too much, so I'm going to undo it. I could reduce the opacity of this sharpening layer, or next time I just won't apply as much. So if I wanted to reduce the opacity, or I'm just going to hit 5, Shift 5 to change my opacity on this brush to 50%. So I just bring back half of the sharpening to the foreground. So that way I can just selectively bring back the sharpening where I want it to be sharpened. Sharpened on the building, I hit 7, it goes back to 70% for a little bit more sharpening in these focal areas. But again, I don't want any sharpening on the sky. So that's one way you can just do some selective sharpening. And I hide the layer so you can see the difference before and after the sharpening. Alright, so once I've done my Photoshop edits, I would just save this now as a PSD, and I could come back and re-edit those later, right? I just might make some notes here about what I've done, you know, sharpening and some different things. But the only problem is I can't go back to Adobe Camera Raw and change an adjustment brush or my gradient tool. I can't go back and forth. So that's really not the best way. Unless you're just really sure that you're done, you can go on into Photoshop. But let me show you another way to do it. It'll save the edits here that we did, just updated. Those are only the ones we did in Adobe Camera Raw. So if I double click that file again, I come back, and this time instead of opening the image straight into Photoshop, I go over here on the bottom and I click this and I check Open in Photoshop as Smart Objects. That is going to be awesome because now it'll allow me to go back and forth between Photoshop and ACR. I hit OK, and notice it says now Open Object. That's a smart object. It can go back and forth. Before it said Open Image, so you know how you can change it right here in this secret place. Uncheck it if you don't want this feature, but we do. So we're going to open our smart object, which is going to let me go back and forth. So I can now, Command J, I could copy that layer, make my edits, and when I'm ready to go back and do something in Camera Raw, all I have to do is go over here and look at my layers palette. You see the little thumbnail on that image? That means it's a smart object. So all I have to do is I just click that little thumbnail, and that icon knows to bring it back in to Adobe Camera Raw. And that's going to allow me to do some edits right back in Adobe Camera Raw, and it's super handy. You might have to double click that to get it to work. So I can come back in and I can lower my exposure. I can do anything. I can go back into my adjustment brush where if I my gradient tool in this case and make some changes to it. I may say, oh, I think I got it a little too dark up there. And then I just hit OK, and it applies that change and brings it right back to Photoshop again. So that's the beauty of using your smart objects. Once I hit save, it's going to update, and you can go back and forth between ACR, and you access that through Bridge right into Photoshop, and you can go back and forth. So that's how to do some really quick edits with Bridge, and then also bring them right into Photoshop as smart objects. So this is the third one of a 3-part series with how to use ACR. And you can access that through Bridge and Photoshop. And what's beautiful about it is you get Bridge and ACR when you purchase Photoshop. They come together. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. This is Karen Esplin. We've been talking about Adobe Camera Raw.